Hey everybody, welcome back to Tavern Talks. It's been a minute. Hold on one second. I noticed something went weird. Give me a second here. Flip. All right, there we go. That's what I was looking for. All right, buddy, everybody. It's been a couple weeks. I'm sorry. The Tavern Keeper has been sick, and I've been traveling, and it has been a heck of a last couple weeks. But we're back, and for episode 132, and with a special guest that I am so glad has come back. For those who have been watching us for the years that we've been playing, Malcolm has not only been an incredible writer, TTRPG creator, but he has been one of the most famous people in the tavern. So I'm so happy to have him back for the third time. And the only person so far has been back for the third time. So
Yes. Am I the only trilogy?
only trilogy so far, yep. So
Amazing. Well, it's such a pleasure because when I first came on, I was really just starting out and I had no idea what I was doing.
we
And I
both
feel like
were.
each time I come back, I'm progressive. Yeah, we're learning as we go.
I think you hopped in probably the first 20 episodes was like
Oh,
when we
really? I
first
was on the
started
ground
getting,
floor.
you were on the ground floor of Tavern Talks, and then all of a sudden, we pushed last year with the whole idea of bringing characters to life, and you brought a very unique character in the goblin that in the water, which was a lot of fun. And then, now we're coming back, and we're going to go back to what the roots of Tavern Talks was tonight. Partially because I've been sick for a couple weeks, but also because there's so much we can unpack here. And hopefully, this gives us some players and or some game masters out here that are watching tonight some great tips. So, Malcolm, before we go any farther, just kind of give them a breakdown of what all you've been doing for the last couple of years because it's a lot.
Yeah, so I got my start making videos, primarily short form videos on TikTok and YouTube, but then somewhere along the way that branched out into trying to write adventures, write D&D modules, and put that content out there. Because a lot of my early content was very much about cats getting rowdy back here. A lot of my early content was kind of giving people ideas for adventures, but when you're constricted to 60 seconds, you really can't convey that much in a short video. So I thought, well, what if I just wrote these down, put them out on Patreon as kind of downloadable PDF supplements? And I've been doing that ever since. And in the last year, incredibly, it's become my full-time job. So I now do this as we've quit the day job and we're in the era of just 9 to 5 D&D adventure writing, essentially. Adventures, campaign settings, modules. And then concurrent to that, I'm still trying to churn out as much content video wise as possible. So at the moment, I'm trying to post basically a video each day, um, as much as I can. There are days when I forget, but most of the time I'm on it.
That's pretty awesome, and the consistency is there. I mean, I don't think I go more than a day or two before seeing something pop up with your stuff, and it's always something unique and it's always something new. Um, for
That's
those,
definitely the strategy for this year was essentially to flood the zone. I was like, I want people to every time they go onto their app, the top video they see if they like D&D is one of mine. And
yeah,
anytime they search a topic, I've got a video out there. I always say, I might not get the most views, but I can just post more than everybody else. I guarantee you, and we'll get there in the end.
that's awesome, and how cool of of a lifestyle to live like this because like I know personally, not only you living the lifestyle in the writing portion, but traveling. So the inspirations that you're gaining by going to some of these lands where you're out in the middle of nowhere, I'm sure that helps so much with just the senses and
Mm,
the magnitude of what life would look like when you're not picking up a car and driving,
yeah.
tomorrow. Like that's kind of, and I think that's awesome. Um,
And what's
one,
great is with this kind of work, I mean, while there is a lot of stuff that has to be done in terms of the video and stuff, I have to do that at home. In terms of writing adventures, you can do that anywhere that you have a laptop and maybe an internet connection. So, for those of your audience who don't know, I live in Scotland, and Scotland is, your perfect medieval fantasy landscape with the mountains, the ancient forests. And so when right now I'm working on a piece which is inspired by sort of Nordic folklore and Nordic tradition. There's a lot of Scandinavian tradition in Scotland, in the sort of northern eastern area and in the Northern Islands. So I just went up to Shetland for, a week, spent time, went to some old ruins, and you just get a feel for it that you can bring back in little ways. And I think that people I've noticed really respond to the projects that are tied to a certain culture or a place like that. I've had some really nice feedback on my Scottish and Nordic pieces.
Yeah, and it makes it unique too. I think it brings that fullness around of actually feeling like you're there because you are taking those mentalities and those emotions that you're feeling when you're
Mm.
sitting in those lands, and you're like, oh no, this is how they would feel. Like this is how people would feel when they're sitting in these dark forests or these ruins. And for somebody who lived from the states, it's very hard to understand what ruins means because like you're sitting on people on places that have been there for 2,000
Thousands of
years,
years.
and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm standing on this thing. What was the story that was told here, right? Um, I think this is such a cool opportunity for you. And who would have ever thought that going from just a couple TikToks here and there to full time writing
It's absolutely bizarre.
and crazy.
And the thing is that I don't think this was ever, it was never a clear plan. It was very much just intuitively seeing what the next step is. You know, make videos, okay, maybe make more videos, okay, maybe we do some Patreon stuff. But there was never, I'd say, a sort of clear vision for, okay, I'm going to get to a certain place by a certain time. And that's very much still the case now. Right now, I'm all in on doing this full time, and I have a vague sense of where I'll be in a year from now, but it's so open. And the landscape of this kind of market that we're in terms of what content is popular, how D&D is evolving. I mean, D&D is going through some big seismic changes at the
Oh yeah.
moment, the whole TTRPG space is. So I feel like it's almost futile to try to guess where we might all be in a year's
Yeah.
time because
No idea.
God knows the hobby is just changing so fast. I'm just excited to be a part of it in some way, you know?
Absolutely. So one thing we definitely want to talk about tonight is your Kickstarter coming up because
Mm.
we were talking about it before we even started the show. Some of the concepts and kind of the thoughts behind it, which I really want to dive into. For those who are brand new to the channel, real quick, just want to give you some heads up on some new things that have changed before we go continue. On the channel, if you can see, there's 4 different chat commands. Job board will allow you to get some information on our YouTube stuff, all of our background stuff. Bar top will allow you to get into our Discord where you can actually talk to some of these guests as they pop in on occasion. Guest will give you all the information about Malcolm and what he's doing over there on Tales Arcane. And then, of course, our sponsors, which is all the people who make this be able to be possible. So I just want to give everybody that update before we continue. Let's see. What got you into writing? Like, what was the thing that caught you that maybe we can give somebody else back and say, okay, hey, this is how you're feeling, this is how you're acting. Maybe writing is an opportunity for you. Like,
I
what got
think
you interested?
it usually begins with the media you're consuming. So I was reading a lot from an early age, and I'd say even before that, I was reading. People were reading to me. My parents were reading me the Lord of the Rings, the Redwall books, kind of classic fantasy fare. And from that, throughout almost all of my life, I've had this deep desire to engage with stories, with fantasy stories and escapism. And at a certain point, there's no deeper engagement than you can have with that kind of storytelling than writing your own stories. And I think the incredible thing I realized when I was younger, I wanted to be a fantasy novelist, as I think most dungeon masters did. But the thing that I realized was that with TTRPGs, you get an instant feedback loop where you're putting out something, telling a story, and getting something back from players. And in a weird way, even though I write an enormous amount of content. I don't get to play most of it, but I still get that feedback loop because other people play it. Other people run it in their own
Right.
games. And almost every day, I get at least a couple of messages from dungeon masters who are running these stories. And I go, okay, I had an idea for a story. I wrote it down and it's now out there in someone's world. And to me, that's just, it's a very pure form of storytelling. And I think you'll know if you have that feeling of kind of, I suppose, yearning for escapism and for a time that is maybe not the time that you live in. A great way to do it is to tell stories.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Uh, and what a cool concept, or what a cool opportunity too. Because I was going to ask you that as one of the questions was, how does it feel when you know somebody else comes back and tells you that run your story. Like, how cool of an idea, right? And you're like, no, I get this 3 or 4 times a day. I would be on a like cloud nine every single day if I saw
It
that.
is
It'd be
every
great.
time I hear that, it's fantastic. And we have a Discord that Tales Arcane Patreon people are in, and there's a lot of different channels for people to kind of feedback and ask questions. And I think my favorite thing is to see one person jump in and say, "Hey, I just ran this particular adventure, this particular encounter from the Patreon. Can someone give me some guidance in a particular area?" And before I even get a chance to reply, someone else has come in and gone, "Oh yeah, I ran that. Here's what I do in this situation." And to see that, the different interpretations of the stories, because I have, as you'll know yourself, if you're plotting out an adventure, you have a rough idea of where it's going to go, but you can't anticipate every outcome, every branching possibility based on player choices. And so the fascinating thing is to hear that uh, something that I thought would be a cut and dried kind of murder investigation adventure, for example, got taken in some bizarre new direction by the players and has now spurned spawned a whole storyline that I could never have conceived of. And I think
Awesome.
what's so exciting is the idea that stories begin with you, but when other people take hold of them and take them away and give them to their players, they take on this almost living form that's totally separate from you or I as the creator.
Yeah.
And that's just the coolest thing to know that those stories are out there. And even now, there are still people playing in those worlds. I mean, to be honest, if my whole thing fell apart, it would be and I just had to go back to my old job. It would be totally worth it to know there are people out there playing, in my little fantasy worlds.
Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing, right? Like, this doesn't stop when you, like, you could pick up tomorrow and be like, I can't do this anymore. I'm stressed. I don't have time to do it, whatever. But that doesn't stop them from playing in those worlds that you've already created.
Yeah,
And
some people are
how
like deep
cool.
into campaigns. I have one. There's one person on my Patreon who updates me every now and then on they're running one of my pirate campaign settings called the Riftwater Isles,
Hmm.
and that was like the third piece I ever put out on Patreon. I put that out like 2 years ago, and they're still running a campaign. And I'm going to do a big updated version of that soon. But I just thought, man, they're still out there experiencing this world that I was writing when I was 2 years younger than I am today. Just incredible, and also slightly terrifying because the moment you
Slightly
realize,
terrifying.
oh, you go back and you start looking at your work and go, oh God, they're going to get to this bit soon, and it's not balanced as well as I thought it should be, and all that. As a perfectionist, I'm sure you find the same thing. You're always, as soon as you let something go, you notice all the flaws in it.
Hmm.
And when you hear someone's playing one of your adventures, you go back and read it, and you're like, God damn, I should have changed 100 different things
Oh
here.
yeah.
I'm getting better at that though.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's the problem, right? Because you have hindsight too, because you are the one that wrote it, so you know all the little tweaks and
Exactly.
that you can change. But the funny thing is, and the one thing I always tell a lot of new game masters is, you're the only one that knows that, because
Mm.
you're the one planning the story. So when you have that opportunity where you start to get nervous or you start to get concerned about things like this, taking that quick breath and go, okay, no, my players don't know what I know, so I can continue to move forward. And then from there, the story's still going to grow. There's not a single story I know out there that, unless you stop the story doesn't stop. There's no option.
And
So,
I think that the player experience is so different from what we as GMs imagine that it is. Sometimes we get caught up in this idea that we have to deliver this kind of perfect beat for beat story, which is hangs together and has no logical plot holes. And the reality is the players are there to have a great time among themselves and to role play and have cool moments.
absolutely.
And I've said this repeatedly in a lot of my videos, that fundamentally what players remember, it's almost never cool stuff the DM did. It's cool stuff their character did. And that's kind of how it should be. And it's like if you're kicking yourself because, oh, I fluffed a cool line that the villain was meant to say at some point, doesn't matter. The players are remembering, how they finessed a guard into letting them into the tavern or something like that.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. I'm gonna put a note in the channel right now, because this is a book that I've been reading over the last about weekend, a little over a week now, and I will tell you, there's so many great nuggets of information for game masters in here that, and
Mm.
what we're talking about is perfect, because that's the point. Is proactive role playing allows you to the opportunity to not have to worry about always having the right answers.
Yes.
because you're focusing on their goals, you're focusing on their story. And when that comes together, everybody is going to write that story a lot better than you would by yourself. And I think that to me has blown my mind. Like, as long as everybody has a goal set forward at the beginning of the story, and you as the game master can facilitate those goals in your world, I don't see that ever being a problem ever again, which I
Mhm.
think is crazy to think. I've been running games for, 20 some years, and the first time somebody looked at me and said, let's instead not react, let's not be reactive, let's be proactive on our gaming. I was I was like, okay, that makes more sense to me. And it makes more sense to me in a way that I don't have to worry about um, all those problems.
So the odd thing is, I'd say that my DMing style is quite reactive in many ways because what I try to do is I prep lots of content. I'm an absolute prepper. I know some people do all the improv, and I will do that if I'm running short on time. But if
Right.
I've got the option to, I'll have NPCs with little backstories and all those elements because what I want to do on the night is drop the players into this space and just respond to whatever they do. Just react and say, "Hey, I don't know how you're going to solve this particular mystery, but I trust that you will." And what I do know is that when you poke a particular NPC, I know about their backstory, and so I'll be able to respond very authentically for that
Mm-hmm.
NPC. And I think that the joy, you have to prep and you have to improvise, but the joy of prep is that it allows you to improvise in a very kind of confident way on the night where the players lead and you just go, "Hey, I know what the world is, so whatever you do, I know how the world bounces back when you poke
Absolutely.
it."
And I think that's what I think you and I are saying the exact same thing, only you're saying it from your side of the story. I think what this book is telling people, being the proactive game master, is that specific thing. It's letting your players be the proactive ones instead of the reactive ones. You're not dropping
Exactly,
them into a
precisely.
story that they don't understand or aren't excited about. You're letting them be excited about something, and then you're reacting to what their excitement is.
Yeah, I think a lot. I've heard people describe the dynamic of the GM and the players as like an author and characters, and I always think that misses the mark because it's much closer to something like I don't know, a singer and a band or something like that, where
Mm,
everyone is really, if it's a good band, everyone is vibing off everybody else and no
right.
one person is kind of taking the lead. Yes, there's maybe someone who is sort of, you know what, even better than that, the GM is the drummer and everyone else in the band is doing stuff on top. The drummer's keeping that beat, keeping everything moving, but they're not dominating and they're letting everyone else style and do their thing on top of that. And it's not just a one man show directing everything.
No, I like that a lot. Yeah, the idea that it being a band rather than a story writer, that makes a lot more
And
sense.
also, it takes all the stress off you. Like, I
Yeah,
talk to people a lot in comments and stuff who are so worried about being bad GMs. And I'm like, you're just there to kind of facilitate stuff for your players. There's only so much you can do.
well, whew. So what do we have coming up then? So we're talking about, we were going into the idea of your new Kickstarter coming out, and what are some of the concepts that you have wrapped around that for our audience?
Yeah, well, I mean, the elevator pitch for this Kickstarter is it's Redwall, but in the Napoleonic era. I'm a big fan of that anthropomorphic animal fantasy stuff. We've got Humblewood, Root RPG, the Redwall books. A long tradition of this stuff, especially in the TTRPGs, Mouse Guard. But it's always a medieval period. It's always sort of sword and sorcery, swords and armor. So with this, I just thought, what happens if we keep the history moving and maybe 500 years into the future, and we end up at a period that's more like the 1700s, the early 1800s, almost Napoleonic era. And basically, we take all these animals, but we give them muskets, tricorn hats, and cool outfits, and a little bit of steampunk tech in there as well, with some airships and that kind of stuff. So this is going to be a campaign setting. I've done an enormous amount of the work has already been done. A lot of the art assets have already been commissioned for various Patreon pieces I'm now kind of bringing together. And what we're going to be asking for with the Kickstarter is actually quite a low sum because it's really just to fund further art assets. I want to pay the artists I work with to do a bunch more cool artwork. and then it will be a digital resource, or the print-friendly version that will go out to all backers. And also that means because we're going digital only and only really charging to get artwork, we can basically make all the prices a lot lower and get it out to as many people as possible. And we are launching that on the 1st of November. It's going to run throughout November.
Oh, nice. That
But
sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, it's somewhat of a risk launching a Kickstarter because you might not get funded, and especially when you're starting out. But with this one, what I wanted to do is to try to go in with minimal risk.
Mm-hmm.
So promote it entirely through my own platforms and not pay for expensive advertising drives, and use the artwork I'd already commissioned previously for other projects instead of commissioning new artwork and going into the red on that. So, the page still looks great. We've got like, a dozen beautiful pieces of artwork on there, but I'm also not panicking about the potential of going broke because I've put in like 10K on this project, and if it doesn't get funded, we're in trouble, which is quite nice. It's like it would be a hell of a lot more stressful if I'd commissioned all this artwork specifically for this Kickstarter drive.
Yeah. No, yeah. No, artwork is expensive. Like
Oh yeah.
anybody that has never done any sort of commissioned artwork is expensive because you are literally diving into somebody's creativity that in this case specifically is going to be marketed not by them but by somebody else. So of
Hmm.
course you have to get that.
And the hours that artists put in to put stuff together. I mean, just the cover artist that I work with on this project. I mean, he is really really great at what he does, but he will go back and forth with you multiple times, sending you different versions. And then he sent me a version I thought was almost a finished piece. I was like, that's fantastic. And he goes, no, no, this is just like a sketch. There's one more to come that's the finished piece. And when that came in, I was like, this is just stunning. And
Right.
that was one of those moments where I saw that and I was like, this is why I'm paying out the nose for artwork.
Right. This is why I pay out the nose for artwork. Yeah. No. I am so blessed because we have some amazing artists in our community of the Misfits that charge me pennies on the dollar from what they should,
Mm.
and I hope one day to be at that level where the artwork is being funded strictly, you know, on the budget at the level that they deserve because some of their stuff. And then we also get really lucky to one of our players, even in our Gen Con channel on Monday nights. He does the doodling while we're playing, and then all of a sudden at the end of the show, he's like, "Look, I did this," and it's like a
I love
full-blown art
that.
piece. And I'm like, I don't know how you do that. Like, I don't have that talent. I have the talent to talk, and that's about all I got. So,
I've got a couple of players who like their note taking is drawing what happens, and
yeah,
I love it. At the end of the session, I'm like, please let me see your notes because it's so cool because you get a little glimpse of what that player's experience was, what things they highlighted, and you can also see how well your descriptions came across. Did their
right,
drawing of the monster really match what you said? And when it works, it's like, oh man, that I had an idea in my head and I can see it now on the paper.
yeah. I've had both of those experiences. Like, oh look, that's what I thought, and then I've had another experience of like, did I not describe that
Way off.
right? Now, what mind you, everything this man creates is amazing. It's just like the little details of how I thought the character was gonna look, and they're just like, I'm like, okay, fine. I was
And
like, I'm
that's
good with
one
it.
of the incredible things I always think when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, either as a player or as a dungeon master, is that I have an idea of what's going on, like a canon version of the events in my head, the dimensions of rooms, the aesthetics, the voices of people. But for the players, each one of them has their own slightly different version of events in terms of what they're picturing in their mind's eye. And just an example of this, I had a character that I was playing a year-long campaign, and at the end of that campaign, we were talking, and it came up that in my mind, this character was quite small and like kind of slight, quite thin and small because he was kind of a roguish character. But everyone else at the table thought he was like massive and built. And I thought that's crazy because and suddenly our two visions of this character collided after a year of being slightly separate. And I just love that
Oh
everyone's
wow,
creating a version of events
yeah,
there.
that's awesome. And it's such a unique idea that you can, or a unique concept that we have as TTRPGs, because you're right, it doesn't just come from one person's thought process. It's the party, and then sometimes you see these moments where, like you said, I thought he was small or I thought he was thin. And you're like, well, I thought this dude was jacked. Like, let's squeeze them together and see what we come up
Yeah.
with. Um, so, for those that are looking at writing, maybe, what are some ways that you, because we were talking about this earlier, like, how do you find inspiration so consistently?
I'm a big believer in take. There's two approaches you can take to anything creative. One is the sort of uh, wait for inspiration to strike, wait for the magic to move, and suddenly an idea comes to you, and that's great if the ideas are coming and the inspiration striking. But if that magical, the sort of the spirit of the muse isn't there today, you're in trouble. The other approach is what you might call it the workmanlike approach, and this is a phrase that Bruce Springsteen loved. Used a lot, and I love this. He would talk a lot about like being a workman when it came to music rather than like an artist, because it's about showing up each day and churning stuff out and seeing what's good there. So I'm a great believer in writing exercises. I publish an encounter every Monday, and that will usually be about 4 or 5 pages long, a full little kind of session essentially. I call them encounters, but they really take a they're like several hours of content potentially. And then I do a full size at 30 to 50 page supplements every month. That comes out sort of first week of the month. And those are like the bigger adventures. And when I sit down, I've got to think of something because
Right.
there's a schedule. So I basically just write a bunch of trash and I churn out ideas and I go ambush. Who's ambushing who? What's a twist here? Maybe the goblin's all the silly hats on. What can I do with that? And I just write anything. And then once I've got a page of trash, I go through it and I find a couple of little gems in there and I polish them up. And there's always going to be
Uh,
something in there that I can work with. And it's like, if inspiration strikes, fantastic. That's great news. But as far as I'm concerned, I do not care whether the inspiration's there. I'm going to brute force it. I'm going to churn ideas out. And there's something in there that you can work up. And I would always recommend to people just be very unprecious about your work. Treat it as like any other job. It's like I saw someone discussing recently the fact that when you come to fitness, I'm really into my fitness stuff. And one thing that people really struggle with is that they have motivation, but they don't have discipline.
right.
Motivation, when it's there, oh, you're up, you're in the gym, you're loving it. When motivation goes, you're in trouble. So discipline is that flat line that underpins motivation. Motivation is fun, but if motivation drops out, it doesn't matter because you have discipline underlying it. And I think that's the approach that I take with my writing is just, you know, uh, treat it like a very simple job. You have to churn out ideas, pick out some good ones, build them up. And
Right.
if they're inspired, you're great. And if not, you're fine either way.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So would you say you take what, like hour, 2 hours, you know, beginning of the month, trying to figure out the next month's stuff, just churning as much as you can, or how consistently are you doing that? Are you doing that daily?
Yeah, I mean, I plan it every week. So at the start of the week, I have my schedule kind of worked out, and I usually have a rough idea of what the next big project will be. And basically the monthly projects are a bit easier because those are big kind of complex pieces, but there's a lot of wiggle room with them in terms of like,
Hmm.
1 month it could be an adventure, the next month it might be an urban setting guide. I can really play around with it. The encounters are much harder to come up with because they're always going to be small travel encounters that you're modular, that could be slotted in anywhere. And that's actually quite a tight parameter to come up with an idea every week. So I always have lots of fun ideas floating around my head for the big monthly pieces. A couple of months in advance, I'm usually thinking about them. Sometimes I put them out to polls in my Patreon. Sometimes I just come up with what I want to do and put it out. The encounters, usually I spend about, I'd say, an hour to 2 hours each week just brainstorming them. Usually on a Thursday or Friday, it's getting to the end of the week, work out what I'm doing next week.
Yep.
And sometimes it just comes at that. And sometimes I'm just banging my head off the wall for hours, chugging coffee, but it always comes through in the end.
It always comes through in the end. And we're hoping it continues to come through. Because like I said, I mean, you've been doing this now for over a year, almost a year.
Yeah,
So
I think I have not tallied up, but I think we've got about 100. I think we've got about 1,200 pages of like
wow.
written content on the Patreon now, plus battle maps, plus videos. I mean, as I said to you earlier on before we started taping, if my ideas ever run out, I'm in so much trouble because I'm just relying on this endless cycle. And the other tricky thing is coming up with daily video ideas. That's the
Right.
tough part. Like
That's the
trying to
tough
come up
part.
with 5 videos every week, it's like Jesus.
Yeah,
But they keep coming, so I'm all good for
that's
now.
awesome. No, and I think it was really cool because like I remember some of the original videos that you were doing and taking, and the movements and the artwork behind it. And for those that don't know, most of your stuff was done through Incarnate, which was a free product at the time, or very very minimal, all the way to the level where it wasn't just the product, it wasn't just maps. You were doing your entire layouts, you were doing everything
Oh
through
yeah.
Incarnate, which was, I'm sure had its own headaches in the beginning, but
Well,
definitely gave you
thankfully,
your own feel too.
I'm delighted to say that I'm no longer using Incarnate for everything. This is a big evolution that happened this year. Just for context for anyone listening who doesn't know this, I initially was designing these PDFs to be downloaded, full of adventures, great material, and I had no idea how to present it. I had no idea how to put the text together. I didn't have any Adobe InDesign or anything, and I couldn't afford any good software for it. So what I did was I used Incarnate, which is a map making browser-based map making software, to create maps that looked like pages with text on them. And then I would download these images, fuse all the images together to form a PDF, and essentially create a PDF that was all images that looked like pages. And this tripped people long enough that they thought I was doing beautifully designed things with a designer software. But earlier this year, patrons reached out to me and said, "Hey, why can't we select text or search keywords in the PDFs?" And I'm like, "That's because they're images; they're not actually text." And so at that point, I realized I had to download some editing software and work out how to do page layout, which I now do. And you can now search keywords and copy and paste stuff from the text, which is a very worthwhile improvement.
Very worthwhile improvement. But no, that's awesome. And like I said, it's utilizing that mentality, that discipline that you were talking about earlier, where you just wanted to make it work. Like you didn't know how it was going to work, you didn't know what you were
Exactly.
going to do with it, but you were going to make it work. And that's a huge thing that a lot of people just don't think about, um, in the long run. Glass, are you
Imperfect
talking
solutions.
about the website for Incarnate, or are you talking about Malcolm's website? You can get all of Malcolm's stuff through his link tree that just popped up.
Ah, thank you. But also, I would say to anyone, Incarnate cannot recommend it enough. It's something like $25, $30 a year,
Yeah,
which for
I
the
use it
it's
every
unreal.
week.
And it's what I love is just how well maintained it is. They're continually updating it, new assets, new bug fixes. Um, yeah, they won't sponsor me because I'm already talking about them in like every second video. So why would they? But my dream is one day to get that Incarnate sponsorship.
Oh, I'll have to reach out with me when we're done. I have some people in that community.
Oh hell yeah, yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, no, I spoke with the guys when they were at Gen Con last year, the year before, and they were showing off their beta for the sci-fi,
Oh, it's so good.
and it's so good. As well as they were showing off how room building was going to become, and I will tell you, the game changed when I could build a room in two
Yeah.
and a half seconds. Like it was so much nicer. Um, now I'm taking most of the, and this is just kind of a trick there now is like you can literally overlay if you want to have everything feel the exact same, especially for like um, online content, or if you're trying to do like streaming like we do on Monday nights. I didn't want everything to feel different, so everything has to go through an incarnate kind of process because all the maps have to look the similar, until we can get enough funding to do a actual downward camera and I can build it out on an actual terrain.
Oh
But
yeah.
that's far and far from today. So what we did is we were actually overlaying them. So what we would do is we would um, we'd throw an image of, right now we're working in Icewind Dale, so I would take one of their caverns that was done in Mike Schlee's format, and I blend it to about 50% opaquity, and then I would be drawing out the lines for things, and then I would add the detail
Ah,
in
yeah,
as I
yeah.
need to. And some of them have come out absolutely incredible, and some not so much. But it is what it
That
is.
is the secret sauce if you're trying to do a cool regional map. You
Mm-hmm.
just get a real world map, like get the west coast of Scotland. It's all raggedy and weird.
Yeah.
Flip it around by 90 degrees so it looks a little bit different, and then just draw over it. Put it down to like, yeah, half and draw over. It looks great.
Look at that. And then if you want to, you cut, take some eraser on a couple things and cut it,
Totally. I might.
done.
There's a one of my recent Patreon pieces was a sort of Lovecraft inspired thing called Saskatchewan County, and if you look at it from a certain angle, it is just like the Upper West Coast of Scotland, very clearly, but with enough changes that
Yeah. But
distinct.
the funny thing is though a lot of people bringing a map that small and then bringing it out to the size that what we see when we do like world maps and stuff, I don't think anybody would ever catch it.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
I think you could literally like I thought about doing something similar to that, but doing the United States before like the Louisiana Purchase. So just take the first half of it and then draw out the like cut out the left side of it or the west side of it, and then see if anybody would ever notice. Right, like just out of curiosity. But and if you want to make it a lot of fun, flip it like you said, take it 90 degrees so the Florida sticks up on the left hand side. Like
Yeah.
great, nobody would ever notice.
Well, that's what if you look at most of the world of Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and
Yeah,
Fire, it's just various British continents, like Britain and bits of Europe kind of mashed together,
yeah.
essentially.
I never even thought about that. I
Yeah, if you look
yeah.
at it, it kind of it's basically like France is where you've got King's Landing and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and that flows up into like the landmass of Britain, which is like the north, and then into Scotland, which is beyond the wall.
Oh wow. I'll have to. I'm gonna have a lot keener of an eye the next time I look at it and be like, oh,
Yeah, you'll
that's
see it.
that's how that is. That's awesome. Um, but it gives you those inspirations, right? And I think they do a lot of that in the books as well because they want to draw strictly from what the culture is and where everybody's pulling from. Um, so here's a good question, and I think this will be a fun one to have a talk about, and as well as anybody in the channel, they can welcome to chime in as well. What are when you're looking at a map or you're looking at a writing piece, where normally do you start?
I usually start is with the writing piece. I will start at the end. I
Okay.
start with do I want some kind of set piece kind of thing at the end? Is this all going to build up to some epic kind of fight in a collapsing castle inside a volcano? And from with that rough sense of what that big set piece might look like, I'll work back from there. So, for example, a piece I recently did was an adventure called The Fate of the Fallen, which was all about it was based in fantasy Scotland, and I used this as the basis for one of my most recent actual plays that went out on Spotify. And what I knew was that at the end of this thing, I wanted a sort of all night holdout in a village where the players just had to survive onslaughts of undead and horrifying monsters and had to kind of rally the villagers to lead this defense. And from that point on, I was like, okay, we need to work out why the dead are rising, or we need to work out why they're attacking this random village and why the players are the only people there to help. And the story sort of writes itself back from there.
Gotcha.
And I think the other thing I usually start with is like, for want of a better word, the vibe of the story. I think what do I want the players to feel while we're in this adventure? Is this going to be something that feels like creeping slow dread of like a Lovecraftian horror, or do I want them to feel like badass cowboys? Are we going for some kind of almost like an old western flavor, a general atmosphere that's going to run throughout the whole thing? Like the piece I'm working on at the moment is essentially inspired by, as I said before, Nordic kind of culture. And what I thought was, I want people to feel that sense of, kind of like the way they felt when they first played Skyrim, and they have this sense of like it's cold, there's a sense of isolation, but that actually just makes them feel warmer and cozier inside as they go into the mead hall or get together with their friends and venture into the far north. And that sense of camaraderie in and sort of hygge, kind of, as the Scandinavians say, this kind of coziness when it's all frozen around you. That's the vibe I want to have in this adventure. And then I can work backwards from there to find a way to develop that into the world.
Yeah, vibe is like you said, vibe is so important because it brings the tone of everything going forward. Um,
But I
I had
know, oh no, go on, go on.
I was gonna say I've had other people on the channel say that they try to pick like three specific words that like they want to emulate in their story. So it could be like you said, isolationism, but camaraderie, and coziness. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, what are these three words gonna? How do I make this into a story?
Yeah, the intersection.
So
And I think, like, but I would say just to go back to that first point, yeah, start at the end and work back. Because if you're ever struggling, you can always think of a cool thing. You can always go, yeah, what if there were demons fighting people at the top of an iceberg that's melting or something? And you can smash a couple of those bits together. And that almost starts to write the story for you because you have to say, well, how did all these elements get here? And now you've got an impetus to start structuring the story around. Whereas if you start at the beginning and work from there, it can feel a lot more kind of meandering along the way.
yeah, that's awesome. And it's so cool that you most of your stories from everything that you and I have talked about are really plug and play stories, which makes things so much nicer for the game master because you can be like,
That
okay,
is
I need this one, and you toss it in.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
the key. It's like it's all going to be stuff that you can just grab and drop it in. And what's funny is like trying to find ways to, because some settings aren't going to be very drag and drop. Like for example, I'm working on one at the moment, which is like a Wild West setting with guns.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, that's how does that fit into a medieval setting? Most people are in, Forgotten Realms style games.
Right.
So I've come up with a premise which essentially allows for this to work. Uh, Essentially that there's a sort of a magical anomaly in a certain area and almost like a magical nuclear bomb has gone off and the area has been like irradiated with magic and this sort of radiated magic is used to fuel firearms but it only works in the irradiated zone and so
Ah.
basically once you're in that zone you can use these sort of like flashing magical arcane firearms but this, if you take them outside they just become deadwood in your hands essentially
Yeah.
and trying to find these slightly implausible scenarios that just justify why this element can just drop into your world is part of the
Hmm.
puzzle. But I never want someone to come to one of my adventures and say, "Ah, we're a few the way our campaign's gone, I can't plug this in anymore. I always want
Right.
to find some way to make it compatible."
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Wow. We're already speeding through time, which is awesome.
Oh yeah.
I love our conversations about this stuff.
Yeah, they
And
fly by quarter two, man.
yeah, right. All right. So at this point, we're gonna open up happy hour, which means the chat can ask questions. Ask any questions you'd like about game mastering, writing, maybe what it's like, adventuring in real life to find inspiration. Uh, Happy to do those. And while we're gonna do that, we're just gonna kind of let Malcolm give some information on what's coming up next with the Kickstarter because I want to let you kind of give an idea of what do we have to look for because it's not just Napoleon Age meets Redwall. There's a lot more to it. What are some of the things we're expecting to see in the Kickstarter?
Well, in practical terms, it's a campaign setting. So you're getting all of the lore, the locations, the world building you need to run stories in this setting, but it comes with a lot of mechanics as well, a lot of systems. So from a mechanical point of view, there's 11 new races, all the playable races of different animals you might encounter in the forest, like badgers, foxes, wildcats, and so on. They're all entirely new homebrewed races I've created for this project. Then there's an overhauled alignment system. One of the big things I wanted to explore with Wildergrove was the sort of dichotomy between civilization and wildness and nature. So instead of having evil and good and these sort of traditional moral poles, the alignment system is all based around the idea of how comfortable you feel essentially in a city, in a modern urban environment, how comfortable you feel in a forest, a more rural space, and where you are on that spectrum. And instead of it just being a sort of general role playing guide, it gives you advantages. So your certain skills are going to be better for someone who feels at home in the wilds or a desert, as opposed to someone who is, meeting people charismatically navigating through a city. So the overhauled alignment system, I'm a big fan of, and I'm excited to get that out there, see other people use it. A lot of homebrew items, a lot of homebrew gear, because we're kind of trying to move beyond the swords and stuff and getting a lot of cool firearms and tech that feels right for that Napoleonic era. And finally, there's a whole system for airship combat.
Ooh.
uh, I love airships, as that classic steampunk Zeppelin. I'm still kind of gutted that we never got a proper age of Zeppelins in the real world. They were kind of coming in, and then we got planes, or we forgot about
And then we
Zeppelins,
got planes that said, yeah, it's
and
time.
the Hindenburg happened, sadly. But
I mean, there is that.
I love an airship, and so I wanted a good combat system that allowed for really dynamic, three-dimensional airship combat. One thing that I've kind of found irksome with certain systems for aerial combat is that essentially all takes place in a flat plane. So the system I developed and playtested for Wildergrove is a sort of three-dimensional where you can fly your ship up and down, move it around through dimensional space. You're not just uh, on a flat skybox essentially.
Right.
So a lot of fun stuff there, and this is all coming out a single 200-page plus PDF. I need to double check the figures, but it should be around, like, it would be like 20 to $25 for the whole
Oh, for
thing.
the whole thing? Wow.
And basically, the more people sign up, the more we'll add on content to it. So you'll get the
Yeah.
base thing is just like we hit our funding goals. Everyone gets the base product. But if we exceed our funding goals, which will be pretty low, we add on more items. We add on a monster index and so on. From
Yeah.
there. So yeah, 1st of November on Kickstarter. You can sign up for the pre-launch page now, though.
There you go. Go over to his go over to his link tree and hop onto that Kickstarter. Don't want to miss it. I'm telling you, anything I've seen that comes out of Malcolm's hands is not something to miss. So,
Thank you, man. I
of
appreciate
course,
that.
man. No, like I said, everything you and I have talked about storytelling, about writing, and it has been very genuine, humbled, and comforting because I feel like there's always that sense of your only goal is to tell the next story, to write the next story,
Mm.
and that to me has some almost homey feel, like family feel to it, because you're no longer, it's not, well, we need to get 3 books out by this end of the quarter or we're not going to have,
Yeah.
be able to pay next month's rent. Like, it's not that, even though that might be the mentality, because we still got to live, we've got to eat, and we got to have a place over our head. But even to this point where you're a full-time writer, your next goal is nothing more than, how do I get the next story out? Where does the inspiration for my next story come from?
And I think what's the great thing about this content creator thing that we're doing is that it is so immediate in terms of the impact. So if you publish a book, Wizards of the Coast brings out a book, or even a third party publisher brings out a book, GUI or someone like that, they have to then look at sales figures, and whether or not it's a success is based on numbers, very understandably. But for me, when I post something, my operation is so small that it's a success if, you know, Jimmy messages me on Instagram, or someone hits me up in Discord and goes, "Hey, I ran this for like me and my teenage son and we loved it." I'm like,
Yeah.
boom, massive
Boom.
success.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the fantastic thing is when you're the beauty of being a really small creator, as I still am, is that I can see it working for people. I can see people using the content. My dream is one day to see a live stream of someone running one of my adventures just by accident. Really hoping that one day I'll see like a small YouTube channel or something like that running a Wildergrove adventure or something. I can sit in on it and chat quietly and appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah. No, and you've done, like I said, and you've done all these spaces already. You've got your show over on Spotify, or your game over on Spotify. You've been doing TikTok now for a couple years, and for those that don't follow him on TikTok, you're missing out, because those are usually some of the greatest little like snippets of ideas you can use for your own games. That even to this day, I every once in a while will hear one come back from the old days, and I'm like, oh, I remember when he said that, and those are great
Oh, you're too kind.
ideas.
Although it's crazy. You ever see those old videos of mine? I mean, it's like the production quality is very different to how it
Oh
is now.
yeah,
I've got
like I
my
said, the same thing here.
like
So
these days it's all green screen and carefully edited and lit, and back
yeah,
then it's just a dark room with a candle essentially.
yeah.
But it got me started. It
But it
got me
got you
started.
started. And one of the stories till this to this day I still remember is the one where you were describing um, the place where the artwork was, or the stone statues, and it was, there was a
Oh
basilisk that was around, and
yes,
I was like, oh my goodness, like such a cool little
that
idea.
that actually went on to become one of the encounters in my Patreon. So you can actually get that one. I can't remember what it's called, but it's in there where you can, there's a proper battle map for it and
Yeah,
all the stats.
but yeah, that was a good one, and it was just a cool concept. It's like, oh yeah, no, this artist just decided he was gonna tame a basilisk, and then all right, there's my next artwork piece.
I love stories. I love NPCs. That's like my big kind of interest, and I love stories about kind of bitter charlatan NPCs and just the funny little things they get up to. And it
Right.
just made me chuckle the idea of a guy who's like not actually a good artist or has never put his work into getting good, but it's just going, look, if I get a basilisk and turn people to stone and claim it's my beautiful stone carving, people will lap it up. It's like shortcuts. It's a funny idea.
Can you imagine so and so is just like selling people off technically because he's like, yeah,
That's what he was
now a
doing.
stone. Send him off to the local lord's house so he can sit there and hold his uh hold his coat when he's
Yeah, well,
when he's
and I had
singing.
I think I wrote it into the encounter that if the players lost the encounter and all got turned to stone, they would later wake up as like almost like in someone's collection in like a museum somewhere several months later, having
Yeah,
finally come out of
come out
petrification
of
to someone.
petrification. That's great. Oh my
God, we are
goodness.
tight on time. I just realized it's six
Yeah.
minutes too.
Anybody have any other questions? Otherwise, we're gonna get here and wrap up here in a minute. That way, Malcolm can get some sleep since it's like 2 o'clock in the morning where you're at.
Well, we only do this every kind of like 10 months or so, so it
Yeah, I
feels like
know.
an occasion. It's worth staying up for it.
Oh, I thank you. I appreciate that. Truly, it's like I said, it's an honor to have you back for the third time, and every time something new comes from it. We're finding out you were starting TikTok the first time you came in, and then we did a nice little quick story, and maybe that story went on to be a Patreon. I don't know. I haven't went through all your Patreon yet. It's quite a bit of content, and and now you're getting ready to produce your first Kickstarter. I expect nothing but success for that, of course. And to your artists, oh my goodness! For those
Oh,
that
they're
have
great.
not looked, um, the Wild Grove is definitely not just a beautiful piece written by Malcolm, but his artwork for his artists are above and beyond. Um, for those that don't know, artwork is so expensive, and we definitely want to make sure that that is the main focus of pushing that Kickstarter along, is to get those artists what they deserve, because that is
Totally, because the coolest thing is if you can pay someone like I'm good at some things, but I'm not good at others. And if I can find someone who's really good at a certain niche, I want to pay them to do that, do what they do best, so I
yeah,
can go off and do what I do best. And
absolutely.
I love seeing artists, especially we're obviously dealing with a sort of a deluge of AI generated art that's clashing against like freelancer art, and I'm so like excited to be able to pay a human artist to make this cool artwork.
Artist.
It's
Yeah.
just it's I don't know. It feels like a good thing to take a stand on at the moment.
No, I agree. I think the only thing really that I've seen that artwork for AI that's been useful is artists are using it now as kind of like their concept, right?
Concept stuff, I've seen that.
And
Yeah,
that seems to be a direction that I would be okay with an artist going, because it speeds their process up. But as long as when you look at the artwork and you look at the concept and you go, okay, those don't look the same. Like if you're just going in and changing the finger to make sure that you've got
yeah.
5 fingers, no, that's not artwork. But if you're going to actually go in and you're going to change parses of it and change coloration, things like that, textures, things, tones, stuff like that, then you're making it your own. And that's no different than, in my opinion, that's no different than us taking your module and playing it and it being our own module. Wild Grove is going to be somebody else's world one day. It's not just your world, and that's the crazy thing about writing, especially in TTRPG industry, because but then as of now, I mean, most worlds are not our world anymore. Forgotten Realms has changed tremendously between player and game master. Lord of the Rings is changing tremendously between player and game master now that we're adding that concept to it, and vision and things like that. So I really think that these are great opportunities for people to be able to utilize those tools, but I don't think we should be utilizing them in a way that is taking from the trueness of what they're being pulled from. Right. I don't have any other chat. I think we've answered all the questions. But Malcolm, is there anything last you would like to say before we close out for the night?
No, just thank you for having me on, and thank you for always making me feel like a part. I always feel like I'm a little bit away from where the cool community stuff is happening. You know, the US, where all the creators are. I'm over here in the UK, but it is lovely whenever I come onto these podcasts to kind of chat to yourself and go, "Oh yeah, I'm part of this wider community as well." That's a really nice feeling. So thank you for that.
Of course, man. No, thank you for coming on once again. Definitely pop over to his link tree, check out his new Kickstarter coming out, and sign up for that. Get on an early note so we can see what that's going to look like going forward for him. And keep an eye out, because I have a feeling Malcolm's going to just keep growing because he keeps coming up with content. So
Fingers crossed. Let's just
crossed.
hope the ideas don't run out.
I don't think they will. And when they do, give me a call. We'll do something.
Yeah, we'll talk.
All right. Hey, I'm Tabletop Misfits. This is Tavern Talks, episode 132 with Malcolm over here at Tales Arcane. Thank you once again for coming to hang out with us tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure to have everybody here in the audience as well as you. Keep an eye out. We've got some new things coming. Tomorrow night we have Beaker's Builds, where he's going to be continuing his creation he's going to continue to build his Gunpla, as well as we are getting ramped up for Moria. Moria comes in 2025. Get excited. We're prepping for players. We're prepping for cast. And we're super excited to find out how deep we're actually going to dive into the lore this time. Keep an eye out. Otherwise, see you guys on Monday nights over on Gen Con TV. And next week, we'll see you guys back here at the Tavern. Have a wonderful night. Raise your glasses high. We'll see you guys. This is Tavern Talks. Have a wonderful night.